obviously, no, I actually, people say, well, how can you do that? Right. Mine's laughing so hard. It's just, that's it, you know?
Yeah.
I want to, life is too damn serious, and I think we all should be laughing more. That's my policy.
Visiting every day.
Hi, Margaret.
Getting old is not persistence. What? Dinner is served.
Are we ready to start? Welcome to First Universalist of New Madison on this beautiful, truly spring day. Hopefully we're past the winter now. Occasional frost is not going to hurt us. Do we have any announcements?
Just a reminder, next week is our El friends are having their annual Easter fair, and so if you get down to El Dorado between 4 and 6 at the Universalist Church in El Dorado, you can join them for their Easter fair. It's from 4 to 6. It's next Saturday, April 1st. Come shop at the bazaar. There will be lots of baked goods, homemade candy, and crafts. And then remember, last week I pointed out there would not be a dinner that you could buy this year. Anyway, if you can get down there, I think it would be well worth our while to visit our friends, and we'll see them the following day at the Union service, which is next Sunday right here at New Madison, starting at 10 o'clock.
Yes, next Sunday, New Madison will be here. There'll be a carry-in afterwards. We've pretty much got that pretty established with everything we need. Derek will be preaching, so hopefully people always enjoy hearing him. And we debated, did we want to ask their pianist, whose name I don't know?
Robert Baldwin.
Yeah, to invite him to play something?
We got it.
You got it?
He's always asked to play down there. Don't you think it'd be nice to ask him to play there?
It might be short of notice for him, I don't know.
Well, it's just out of politeness. You might ask her, one of us might ask Derek,
Okay.
because we don't want him to feel like he's not welcome or not invited.
Definitely.
But we also don't want to pressure him to do it if he doesn't feel like he should. So hopefully,
He invites Lloyd.
yes, that's why I say as a reciprocal thing, we should at least make the invitation clear. All right. Any other announcements? Oh, today we're doing, actually, you can see from our slide projection here, we're doing a concentration on, and I use the word concentration advisedly, on the Holocaust. The reason we're doing that is we're doing, after church, we're having a presentation of Ken Burns's, there's a 3-hour, well, actually they're 2 hours apiece. If we were going to do the whole thing, it would be 6 hours, so we're not going to do that. But it was on PBS, on the Holocaust, the American response to the Holocaust. So I've got the CDs here. We can take samples or just run through 1 or 2 of them, whatever people would want to do. Dolly was nice enough to bring in Art Spiegelman's Mouse. That was a cartoon, graphic novel, I guess they call them now, on the Holocaust, which has been banned in many conservative schools and libraries, because there are some pictures, cartoon drawings of women being led to the gas chambers with no clothes on. And somehow that one panel in a 500-page book was enough to excite these people to try to force the book off the shelves.
And then mice.
And mice, yeah. They weren't even people, they were mice. So I think there might be an ulterior motive there, and we might discuss, I've got some things on joys and concerns. We'll talk about Florida a little bit there too. So these books will be available in the back if anybody wants to look. You don't have to come to church to come to the showing after church. Church is usually over at 11. Probably by 11:15 or 11:30, we'll have the video going. We'll have snacks. We got an air fryer and a toaster oven and all kinds of little finger foods that we'll heat up, and soda pop to drink. If you want beer, you have to bring your own. All right, our prelude, Oh Worship the King. Where would we be without music? All right, our chalice lighting is A Spark of Hope by Melanie Davis. If ever there were a time for a candle in the darkness, this would be it. Using a spark of hope, kindle the flame of love, ignite the light of peace, and feed the flame of justice, which we proclaim on our little banner every Sunday on the wall here from the Unitarian Universalist Association. Okay, our opening hymn is 108, My Life Flows in Endless Song. to live by, when triumphs tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing? Okay, our invocation is to join the journey by Lynn Cox. This is a little parenthetical note. This was written, they did an actual worship service on the Wizard of Oz theme. That has sparked inspiration, so we might be doing that in the future. I think that would be fun. Come, you accidental pilgrims, you who find yourself on a journey of surprise and wonder. Come, you who emerge into this place as an act of liberation. Come, you who seek a life of mindfulness and a place to test your thoughts. Come, you who bring hearts of all kinds, heavy hearts, rusty hearts, hearts broken open in revelation, hearts full of love to share. Come, you who seek courage, and you who have more courage than you realize. Come, you who stand behind the curtain, gathering up the resources to claim your truth. Come, you who have been in a bubble, and you who are poised for transformation. We begin our story again, gathering courage, love, mindfulness, and a sense of purpose. We gather as a people of all ages, of different abilities, different backgrounds, and different perspectives. We share a covenant, a direction for our shared journey, and a commitment to encourage and challenge one another to spiritual growth. This path will ask much from us. Let us move forward with love. Let us move forward with appreciation for one another. Let us move forward knowing we are not alone. Whoever you are, whatever your gifts, you are welcome to join this journey. Okay, our children's story is a little PBS thing on the Holocaust. And remember last week we talked about wokeism. I found this and I thought it was appropriate. Some people use the word woke as it's supposed to be an insult, but mostly they use it because they can't spell empathetic, educated, or enlightened. So take that.
After Kristallnacht, Britain had allowed 10,000 children, but not their parents, to escape Nazism in what was called the Kindertransport. In February 1939, Democratic Senator Robert Wagner of New York and Republican Congresswoman Edith Norris Rogers of Massachusetts introduced a new bill.
The bill says let's let in 10,000 kids between the age of 5 and 14 per year, 1939 and 1940, and let's not count them against the immigration quota system.
The First Lady backed the bill. Her husband privately offered advice on how it might be passed, but said nothing in public. But the American Legion, the Daughters of the American Revolution, and the American Coalition of Patriotic Societies were all opposed. They had favored some of the 60 bills that had recently been introduced to reduce immigration quotas.
It's a xenophobic refusal. I can't explain it because it seems so cruel to me, especially given a country as big as the United States with plenty of space. I do understand it in terms of anti-Semitism. I don't want to understand that anti-Semitism could be so
Reagan called for the creation of a national Christian front to combat the influence of what he called communistic Jews, and claimed to his vast radio audience that Jewish businessmen were firing their Christian employees to make room for Jewish refugees.
There is still the United States Senate with whom these forces must contend.
The restrictionists, people who want to restrict immigration, the isolationists, the anti-Semites come out of the woodwork. Democrats, Republicans, people say things like, 10,000 ugly children will grow into 10,000 ugly adults.
What has happened to us in this country? We have always been ready to receive the unfortunates from other countries, and though this may seem a generous gesture on our part, we have profited 1,000-fold by what they have brought us. Eleanor Roosevelt.
No group was more adamantly opposed to admitting Jewish refugees than the German-American Bund. 20,000 members would fill Madison Square Garden on Washington's birthday. They were led by Fritz Kuhn, a German immigrant who fancied himself the American Führer.
What we are actively fighting for under our charter. First, a social just, white, Gentile, ruled United States. Second, Gentile-controlled labor union, free from Jewish Moscow direct domination.
Other speakers railed against the president, Frank D. Rosenfeld, and his Jew deal.
We only call upon our leaders to awake to the fact that the Jew is as alien in body, mind, and soul as any other non-Aryan, and that he is 1,000 times more dangerous to us than all the others by reason of his parasitic nature. Red floods of tears for a few 100,000 job-taking so-called poor Jewish refugees, who incidentally in general have more of this world's goods than you or I will ever possess.
A Fortune magazine poll found that only 1 in 10 respondents favored increasing quotas or making exemptions for refugees, and 4 out of 10 believed Jews had too much power in the United States. It further found that 85% of American Protestants and 84% of Catholics opposed offering sanctuary to European refugees. So did more than a quarter of Jewish Americans. During hearings on the bill to admit some refugee children, a witness said that it should be passed because it was true to the American tradition of providing sanctuary for religious and political refugees. New York Congressman Samuel Dickstein gently corrected him. This is the form of our government, but as a matter of fact, we have never done the things we preach. We talked about it.
The advocates of that bill, the people who submitted it, withdrew it. And they withdrew it because they thought, if it comes to the floor, it will open the way to other proposals to utterly stop all immigration into the United States. In 1939, for FDR, the most important political challenge he faced was getting the Congress to revoke the Neutrality Acts, the acts that restricted our ability to supply other countries if they became involved in a war with Nazi Germany. The relaxing of the immigration quotas was less important to him than that. To us, looking back, we tend to think that the most important thing was the humanitarian crisis of the time. But of course, if FDR had not succeeded in repealing the Neutrality Acts in 1939 and 1940, we might think otherwise.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bachstein. Thanks for watching that excerpt from our film, The U.S. and the Holocaust, which explores the story of how the American people grappled with one of the greatest humanitarian crises of the 20th century. Here are some more clips from the film, and you can watch the entire series on the PBS Video app or at pbs.org.
And this is what we'll be showing today, partially. Okay, any comments on that? It's not really a children's story, but education is important and children need to be educated as well as adults, which is a problem in Florida and many other conservative states. So, did you notice the thing about the things you were hearing there? Any of those ring a bell with what's going on now? It's almost a direct copy of what we were hearing there. You've heard the replacement theory on Fox News about how Obama and Biden are letting all the immigrants come in from Mexico so they can replace the white workers in the United States. A direct copy from what we heard there, where the Christians are being fired and the Jewish refugees are being hired. History repeats itself, and if you don't pay attention, you're liable to be swept up in the same repetition. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. All right, joys and concerns. I think first of all, tornadoes in Mississippi, 25 at least already. And there's people there's entire towns that have just been completely leveled. They said that one tornado was on the ground for 80 miles. That's, I think, some kind of a new record for staying on the ground for a distance. And there were like 6 or 7 different tornadoes. And I don't know what the affinity is for tornadoes and trailer parks, but if there's a place where a tornado is going to do a lot of damage, it is a trailer park, which is basically a little box sitting up in the air with no place to hide, no reinforced walls. They're basically death traps in a tornado. You would think maybe in states like Mississippi or states that are prone to tornadoes, they would start setting up public shelters, places that would be safe for people to go. But so far, nobody wants to spend public money for that yet. Let's see, anything else? There's been disasters all over the Ukraine. I guess the scariest development at the Ukraine is Russia is now sending tactical nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons to Belarus, which borders the Ukraine. That doesn't say they're going to use them, but it says if they can't use them if they're not there. So if they're there, and we know that Putin does not like to lose, and it looks like he's losing now. So what happens when he's pushed into a corner? We don't know. Anything else?
We've been very fortunate here with all the tornadoes.
Yes, we've been bypassed, although I can show you if anybody wants to see it afterwards. I was in Union City working on one of my houses and was coming back on Union City Palestine Road. The water was almost up to the level of the tires on my truck, and it had gone down from what it was originally. So I forded through there, and a mile down the road, there was a tree across the road with power lines tangled up in it, so I had to turn around and go back anyway. So
Is that right now you're talking about?
That was yesterday. So if I'm sure you've noticed the wind was really strong yesterday, and thank goodness to the electric power company. If you've noticed the tree trimming going on, they are really aggressive, and I don't like to see them butcher trees, but that's the only reason we still have electricity is because they've trimmed the trees back so the limbs don't fall down on the lines. Now, if you're trimming trees, I'll just throw this in. If you're trimming trees at your home, some people, I don't know why the arborists, I'm sure the arborists don't encourage this, but they give them what they call a haircut. They just cut the tree like completely all off at the same level. That's not the way you trim trees. You trim out the forked trunks, you trim out the mass of foliage that shouldn't be there, but you leave the basic stems in place and you leave the shape of the tree in place. These old maples, the elms, some of these trees, the oaks, have a beautiful silhouette if you look at them from a distance, and after they've given a haircut, they're just ugly. And actually, when they're given a haircut, that shortens their life dramatically because the rain soaks into when they cut the branches off horizontally, the rain soaks into that and starts to rot, and then the tree is basically doomed. So please encourage, if they're trimming your trees, encourage them to do selective trimming and not the haircut. Okay, the thing on Florida, they have just passed the new rule in Florida against the universities and colleges, and basically what they're trying to stop is DEI, which is anything against the gay, anything against understanding, equality, basically the basic American values. They have passed a law that you can't discuss in school. You can't discuss equality, you can't discuss independence, you can't discuss interdependence with other people. Where are we going with Florida like that? They've also passed a law in Florida that any university or public education place that spends any public money on medical care for gay or trans people, in other words, if they're getting help with their medications or surgeries, that has to be reported to the state. So they are trying to identify and list all of the people who are gay or trans in Florida. The state is trying to do that. Does this sound anything like what we're going to see a little bit on the history of Germany in 1932 and 33? Unfortunately, yes. Right. For those thoughts, prayers, those fears that you harbor, those joys that you're not willing to share, we are willing to share and wanting to share those with you if you feel the need, and if not, we are with you in spirit. All right, our message is on the PBS thing by Ken Burns. It was 6 hours, basically 2 hours on 3 different things, and we're going to do a little bit of discussion on that. The primary thing on the Ken Burns was the American response to the Holocaust, and that's what we saw in the little overview there. 84% of Protestants and Catholics were against having more Jewish refugees. At the beginning, in the 30s and 40s, people didn't realize nobody could actually understand, nobody could really think that people would want to act the way the Germans were acting. And even the Germans were kind of surprised by the way they were acting. And as I've talked about before, and as we've mentioned before, all this started slowly. It didn't start out with concentration camps. It started out with, if you were Jewish, you couldn't belong to certain clubs, or you couldn't have a business in a certain place, or you couldn't be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever your profession was. Or then you had to wear the Jewish star as you walked down the street to be identified. Kristallnacht was in 1930, I think it was in 36 or 37, was when, and that's what this picture is here. This is when they started out putting up the signs before they actually destroyed the businesses in the 33, 34, 35, 1935. This says, do not buy anything from the Jews. Kauf nichts bei Juden means do not purchase anything from the Jews. And they labeled all these Jewish stores by that. And then before long, they told the Jews they couldn't have the stores, and they made them give up the stores. This was not an idle progression by the Germans and the Nazis. They needed money to build their military machine, to buy all their war materials. Where can they get the money? Who had money in Germany? The business people. That was the Jews. So all the Jews that lost their businesses were forced to forfeit those businesses and give it to the German state. They took that material, they took the money from the businesses and put it into the German war machine. They went farther when they started encouraging, and Jews wanted to leave the country. Many of them wanted to leave the country, but their problem was they couldn't find a place to go because the United States wouldn't admit them as immigrants. Some of them went to South America, some went to Spain, some went to Italy, which was a bad place to go because of Mussolini. Some went east to Poland and other states where they thought they might be safe. That also turned out to be a mistake. But the Germans, before they would let them leave, made them surrender all their belongings. They only allowed them to take $2,000 or $3,000 or Reich marks with them, and they had to turn over all the rest of their money before they left to the German government. So this basically was a giant robbing scheme, a giant target, to put the target on people that had money and to take the money away from them. Okay. Another name for the Holocaust is Shoah. How many of you are familiar with that term? Shoah is a Hebrew term meaning calamity, and that's what the Jews themselves called what was happening to them. This all started out really slow, but between 41 and 45, over 6 million Jews were killed, but not just Jews. Everybody was a target. If you were Slovakian, if you were anybody who was not Aryan or considered a German race was considered the underclass. So the Poles, the Ukrainians, the Hungarians, the Romanians, the Gypsies, the Roma, they were all sent to concentration camps. So there were basically 6 million were killed over the course of the war, but many were eliminated before that. I told you a little bit before about how this all started. We talked about eugenics. Eugenics is the scientific study of the improvement of a race or a gene pool of either animals or people. The Germans applied this scientific theory to improving the human race, and one way they wanted to improve the human race was to eliminate the defective humans. One way you eliminate defective humans like Down syndrome or diabetes or blindness or whatever is inherited is by not allowing those people to reproduce. So they instituted mass sterilization laws. People who had like Down syndrome people or mentally handicapped people, people with physical maladies were actually forcefully taken into the hospital and sterilized. This started in the 30s and 40s. Then they started, eugenics said that you needed to clean out the population of this, so then they started what they called, and what we call euthanasia. So if you were handicapped, mentally handicapped, and this was not limited to the mentally handicapped, it was also instituted for if you were a murderer, if you were convicted of a crime and sent to prison, rather than spend the money it would take to keep you alive in prison, you were euthanized. That's how the killing chambers got started. And they started small and they basically built up. This did not spring fully formed into life in the 1941 or 1940. They started out by euthanizing the desirables, the less desirables in the population. And then that who was less desirable kept on expanding. It went to the Roma, which were the Gypsies, were not desirable. Then it was the communists, then the socialists, then the political prisoners. Homosexuals were labeled. And interestingly enough, Jehovah's Witnesses was an actual listed group. They were marked by the triangles. You saw the Jewish star. Did you realize the Jewish star made out of yellow paper was actually 2 yellow triangles at angles, which made a Jewish star? But if you were a political prisoner, you had a red triangle. If you were a Jehovah's Witness, you wore a purple triangle. Every targeted group, as they went through these internment camps and onto the concentration camps, was marked and labeled, not just with a tattoo on their arm, but with a visible thing when walking down the street. Homosexuals had a pink triangle. How much has changed? Not much. And these people were all marked for extinction, not all at the same time, not each individual. Some people managed to pass through and escape. All right, Kristallnacht, let's see. That started the Jewish emigration. That really pushed the Jews to emigrate. One of the stories was there was a freighter or a passenger liner that I think it was 33,000 or 6,000 Jews purchased passage to go to a South American state. I think it was what was the South American state that had all of the German population, which I can't think of right now, but I will. Paraguay, I think it was Paraguay. Purchased passage to Paraguay. Paraguay sold them passports, sold them immigration papers that they could go for a large amount of money. The German government charged them a large amount of money to leave, basically all their savings, except for what they spent for the ticket. They boarded the ship and headed down. Then the German government put pressure on Paraguay, the government of Paraguay, and they canceled their visas. So they were not allowed to land in Paraguay. So the captain of the ship, he was not a Nazi, he was just a normal person with a heart, he took them to Cuba. They said they would take them for a certain fee to buy their papers. They all bought papers in Cuba, and then the Cubans turned around and wouldn't let them land. So then they came to the United States and applied for immigration and applied for refugee status in the United States. The United States did not let them land, so they returned to Bremerhaven. All their money was gone. They spent months on the ocean. And this is families with kids, the whole works, back to Germany. And I think they said like 80% of those people eventually died in the concentration camps. The Dutch family we've all heard about, those people, that family actually had applied for immigration status to France, to Spain, to the United States. They were denied in all those places. And that's the family that they hid the family in the upper part of the building until they were finally turned in. Anne Frank, the Frank family. Otto Frank, the father, he survived. He was the only one in the family who survived. And he found Anne Frank's diary, and that became a national and an international picture of what life was like under the Nazi occupation. People don't realize that this thing creeps up on people very slowly, but it does, and we have seen the same things that we talked about in the movie, and the same things if you stay for the movie of the presentation of Ken Burns, you will see the same things happening. Americans, prominent Americans, were anti-Semitic to an unbelievable degree. Henry Ford, the creator of the whole business practice of mass production and getting the price of a car down, everybody could afford it, actually bought a paper in Dearborn, Michigan, and published the Elders of Zion, which, if you have any knowledge of the Jewish history, the Elders of Zion was produced in the like 16 or 1700s, about how rich Jewish people were taking over the world, basically the same story that's been told over and over again. He published that in this paper and had just tremendous amounts of anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic propaganda in his newspaper. Henry Ford, for some reason, and no one knows why, hated the Jews. Another prominent person who was prominent anti-immigration, savior of anybody coming from Germany was Charles Lindbergh. The person who was the first to fly the Atlantic, was an American hero. Went around, he actually founded and started the America First movement, which still exists today. No immigrants, America for Americans. He went to Germany multiple times, was feted and honored by the German government, given all kinds of awards. He loved their development of airplanes and air power, as he was a real prominent pusher of that. And even Lindbergh was surprised by Kristallnacht, but his surprise and his revulsion was not because it was anti-Jewish, it was because it made the German people look bad on the international scene. He said, why are they doing this in public? It makes the German nation look like an oppressor. It looks like a totalitarian government, even though it was a totalitarian government. And Lindbergh did not stop his opposition to the American involvement. He was against Lend-Lease. Remember, they talked about Roosevelt's primary concern was trying to get that Neutrality Act stopped. The Neutrality Act said that we could not give money or material or support to England, France, any country that was facing Nazi Germany. Once that Neutrality Act was stopped, then the American ships started carrying all the material, and this was not given to Britain. It was the British bought it, and the French bought this material, but it couldn't be sold to them before the Neutrality Act. Lindbergh was against it canceling the Neutrality Act. He wanted America to stay completely neutral and actually wanted America to be more friendly to Germany. He only became quiet after Pearl Harbor, after the Japanese bombed America, and 2 weeks after that, Germany declared war on the United States. We did not declare war on Germany first, they declared war on us. That's when the American first people all of a sudden stopped, and all the propaganda became anti-German and anti-Japanese. And as the procedure for propaganda, they tend to go overboard. Then nobody could speak German. You couldn't have any, you had to change many people who had a German name, like Hornbacher, Hornbacher, spelled it to Hornbacher, Hornbacker. It became less German because it was not popular to be of German extraction during World War II. All right, I told you about the Marks. When they started out with the concentration camps, I told you about Sachsenhausen. We visited that when we were in Berlin. That was the very first one. It was basically a labor camp for political prisoners, for people that the German Socialist Party, the Nazi Socialist Party, the Nazis found in opposition. Communists, labor unions, anybody who opposed them was arrested and placed in Sachsenhausen just to keep them out of the way and so they wouldn't cause any more trouble. As time went along, they found out they could do more and more to these people without any repercussions, so they started executing them. And the executions were interesting. They started out by shooting people, and there is a trench at Sachsenhausen. I think I showed you the pictures of that the last time we talked about this. And part of the reason, let me explain that. I come from a German heritage. My great-great-grandparents came from a town in Germany, came to Canada, and then came down to here. I've always had an interest in it. I lived in Germany for 2 years. I'm trying to learn the language. And I told you about living in Kreuzberg when the Berlin Wall was up and what was happening there. So I have a kind of a personal interest, so you're going to have to suffer along with me there. But they had a trench at Sachsenhausen where they started shooting people. They had to actually dig the trench themselves and then stand in the trench, and then they shot them. Shooting people individually was very inefficient, and that's the way they started out all over. So the next thing they went to, it was something that they had tried for the mentally handicapped when they were doing the euthanasia. They would put them in a closed room and pump in carbon monoxide. They would either tap the furnace into the room, or they would back a car up and put the exhaust into the room. Pretty soon, with German engineering, they created these mobile vans, like semi-trailers, that had the exhaust piped into the van. They would load 50 or 60 or 70 people into the van. While they were driving them to the place where the bodies would be disposed of, all the fumes would be going in the trailer, and by the time they arrived, everybody in the trailer would be dead. That was actually too slow of a method. And curiously, one of the problems they had with this was the people who actually did the service, who actually killed these prisoners. It turns out not everybody was willing to be a murderer. Not everybody's conscience could put up with that. So they were having trouble finding enough people to actually do that and do it by following orders. So they needed to come up with a better method of doing it. That's when they created the actual death camps. That's when the concentration camp area turned into an extermination camp. These containers, or these places, were built underground. People arrived on a train. They actually built train stations with fake clocks and everything, so nobody would be frightened, nobody would be panicked, and there wouldn't be any kind of riots when they arrived. They were told they were being deloused or taken to the showers, so they took off all their clothes, they lined them up, they walked them into the shower, and instead of a shower, and even had shower heads and everything that looked like a shower, they closed the doors, the airtight doors, and they dropped Zyklon B, which was basically an industrial pesticide that displaced all the air and basically asphyxiated anybody in the chamber. They started out with rooms that they could pack 300 people into. By the end of the war, they had rooms the size of 800 people. When after 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and you could hear the people screaming as they were dying, because the people right under the vent where the gas concentration was the strongest died first. The people at the farthest reaches lived the longest. Then they emptied that room and took the people to the crematoriums or the cremation. That was the only thing that was above ground with the crematoriums. Who did the work? We talked about the Sonderkommandos or the Capos. They were actually Jewish prisoners who were selected to do this work. If you want to live, you have to carry out the bodies of your dead family members, comrades, co-religionists. What did they do before they put them in a crematorium? They took all their gold teeth and pulled them out. They took their eyeglasses, which they may have kept. They took their jewelry. They basically stripped them. The women, they cut their hair off, and they used human hair. I'm not sure what exactly for, but they cut the hair and put that off, and then they put them into the crematorium. They were doing, and there were 25 of these major extermination camps, and that includes Dachau, Buchenwald, Auschwitz. You've heard of them. They could kill 6,000 to 8,000 people a day. I can't even conceive of how in rooms of 300 and 400, how you could get 8,000. I didn't understand. I didn't have the information. Maybe there were multiple rooms, or maybe they ran 24 hours a day. All I know is the numbers they ran were 6,000 to 8,000 a day. And that's how many people were burnt in the crematoriums. And once they were burnt, once they cremated the bodies, the ashes that were brought out and the bones were crushed and pulverized, so they wouldn't even be recognized as human bones. And this was all done on an efficient business type proposition. People sat around and decided, you know, the gas chambers with the trucks with the carbon monoxide is not efficient enough. We need to get bigger. We need to get better. We need to get faster. They had, at the end, there were almost 44,000 what they call transit points. Every camp was not a concentration camp. They had education camps for people who could be re-educated. The Germans who had imposed the German dictatorship could be re-educated and reintroduced. They had labor camps. Many people don't realize most of the German war machinery was produced by forced labor. They built tanks, they built aircraft, they sewed the clothes. Everything that was built and supplied in Germany was all done with forced labor. They built roads, and that was part of the whole plan. They worked these people 16 hours a day. They fed them inadequately. Anybody who didn't produce or was found lagging was shot on the spot. The intention was to kill as many people while they were working as possible. It just seems, the whole idea of it is just unbelievable. It doesn't make any sense for real people that an entire society could go into this. And that's kind of what the prostitution of science. This all started out with eugenics and the science. The Germans were very good at engineering and science. They were very good at producing advanced weapons. In fact, they spent so much time and so much money and so much intellectual ability producing advanced weapons like the V2 and the V1, like the 262, the Messerschmitt 262, which was the first flyable jet. And that was a two-engine jet fighter plane that was produced and actually flying before the end of the war. You can imagine what American flyers in their P-51s or a B-17 or a B-24 thought when a plane whizzed by at 380 miles an hour that they couldn't barely even see and not defend against. They spent all this money and energy and education trying to create these super weapons that they neglected to create enough regular weapons. And that was the problem that Germany had during the war. Germany is a small country with a small population and no natural resources. They had no oil, they had very little coal, they had no iron ore. All this stuff had to be imported. And that was the limitation, and that was the insanity of Hitler thinking he could take over the world with a small base like that, and yet he almost did it. If he had not made such critical errors in his choices, like attacking Russia and dividing his forces, he may have actually been able, with the help of the pro-Germans in the United States, if they'd have kept the United States out of the war, we may all be speaking German right now. All right, I think I've covered most of the basic stuff. Any questions? There's a lot of information. I didn't talk a lot about the American response. They talk about it in this little thing here. The majority of people were against bringing in the refugees, but that was before nobody could believe that the Germans were actually doing this. During the war, as people began to understand what was really going on, there began the softening and the willingness to import or allow immigrants to come in began to soften. But it took a long time. And as part of the war effort, one thing that struck me was the reconnaissance planes had taken pictures, and they knew that these concentration camps were there. They knew thousands of people were being killed a day. They had the choice. They could have bombed the railroads and prevented all these people from being taken there. The people in the War Department and the State Department, the same people in the State Department who lobbied against allowing them as immigrants, those same people said if you divert bombs and attention to trying to bomb the railroads, we're not going to win the war as quickly. That's a political judgment, or it's a moral judgment, but they intentionally let the extermination continue, saying that we are going to end the war sooner. Is that the right judgment? I don't know. I can't make that decision. It was Roosevelt's decision to end start the Lend-Lease program, as opposed to trying to push to let immigrants in. Roosevelt was incredibly popular, and anything he got behind and pushed had a really good chance of succeeding. But as they said in the PBS statement there, the most important thing was keeping the war alive, keeping England and France alive, and they put the immigrants at a lower status. Once again, human life is in the balance, and what you do is a choice, and we have those choices every day with the political votes that we make. That's something to consider. Okay, I've talked enough on that. Questions, comments? Okay. Our offering. And we're going to hear as an offering song, Perfidia. Everybody knows what perfidy is, or perfidia. That is, in the translation or the definition of perfidy is treachery. So it is a perfect song to go along with the Holocaust. If you need something, take something. If you have something to contribute, please do so. Treachery, does it?
I don't look at the words.
Okay, our final hymn is 20, Be Thou My Vision. Be thou my vision. Our extinguishing the chalice quote is "Blessed is the path" by Eric Williams. Blessed is the path on which you travel. Blessed is the body that carries you upon it. Blessed is your heart that has heard the call. Blessed is your mind that discerns the way. Blessed is the gift that you will receive by going. Truly blessed is the gift that you will become on the journey. May you go forth in peace. And our postlude is "Might as well be spring." We welcome spring. All right, that ends our service at First Universalist in New Madison. I'll have to go down and get the snacks out of the freezer, and we'll get that started. I'll start the presentation of PBS Ken Burns, and we'll go from there. Our last picture is, I'm a new aficionado of Between the Ears. That is, people contribute photographs when they're riding their horse between their horse's ears of things that they see. Some pretty amazing landscape. The reason I put this one up is you can't really tell. If you come up here and look very close, that is an armadillo. And where is this picture taken? Tennessee. Armadillos are in Tennessee? Is global warming happening? Or I'm used to armadillos as being a Texas-like phenomenon. To find an armadillo in Tennessee and that's the reason this person put it up on the picture. So we'll have more Between the Ears as we go. All right.
Something so armored like that.
I know, I see it right now.
Sweet.
Exactly. Yeah, same shade, same body.
Good, I'm glad you.
Yeah, pouches and then marsupials.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were here until I saw Sharon go look.
You want to mention your issue?
No, of course.
text messages to you.
I know that.
Were they come
Yeah.
this week? I'm not sure that's going out this week. Because I'm doing it. Oh, really? Okay, well,
What we were doing.
yeah, the week before, my second before.
Yeah,
But anyway, those passed. I'm not sure enough to you because I thought. That was, but normally I send the test because after I do them, I send them in myself on test, so I get it ready, so I can prove it. But when I did that, I recently she introduced.
Funding for the U.S. Holocaust was provided by David L. Rubenstein, investing in people and institutions that help us understand the past and the Our Heart Foundation, the Judy and Peter Lee Foundation, supporting those who remind us of American history and the Holocaust. By Gilbert S. Bowman and Martha A. Darling. By the Arthur Byron Davis Foundation, investing in our common future. And by these members of the Better Angels Society, Jeannie and Jonathan Levine, Jan and Rick Cohen, Alan and Shelley